Before the $100 moment, there was a war. In the haze of arcades and neon-lit malls in the early 90s, Sega was everywhere. Their ads screamed out from magazines and billboards. Sonic sprinted, kids challenged each other, and the Genesis rattled the status quo. Sega was loud. Sega was aggressive. They wanted the throne. Across the battlefield, Nintendo stood firm. Giant, familiar, unshakable. Their kingdom was packed with Mario, Zelda, and all the classics. Sega's moves were brash, their slogans bold. The battle raged. Game releases, mascot showdowns, marketing blitzes. Console boxes stacked high in electronic stores, each promising the future of fun. But in the shadow of this chaos, a new challenger arrived. Sony. At first, almost nobody took them seriously. They played with cameras and TVs, not video games. The PlayStation was rumored but brushed off. Sega and Nintendo scoffed, confident that the battle was theirs. Then, E3 1995 was coming. The world's largest gaming expo, bright lights, cutting-edge tech, rumors swirling backstage. Console veterans prepped to stake their claim. The lights dimmed at the Electronic Entertainment Expo of 1995. Excitement buzzing. Industry insiders pressed closer to the stage as Sega prepared to make their mark. Tom Kalinske, Sega's president, stepped forward, his expression intense. He unveiled the Sega Saturn, flaunting specs most had only dreamt of. Powerful hardware, next-generation graphics, the promise of gaming's new dawn. Every detail hummed with possibility. Whispers ran through the crowd. Was this Sega's answer to the looming PlayStation? Then Kalinske leaned in, delivering the bombshell. It's available today. Shock rippled through the audience. Retailers glanced at each other in disbelief. Their shelves hadn't been prepared, their logistics thrown into chaos. Developers gripped their heads. Some of their games weren't ready yet, caught off guard by the sudden release. Then came the final gut punch. The Saturn would cost $399. Some journalists scribbled notes furiously. Others stared in disbelief. Would gamers pay that much? Overnight, Sega had changed the rules. Risk pulsed through their daring gambit. A surprise launch, a steep price, and a hardware marvel. But behind the scenes, rival Sony watched, quietly plotting their counterattack. Sega's risk had launched the console war into its fiercest chapter yet. Night across the city. Behind shuttered glass, store managers checked their new invoices, confusion furrowing their brows. Sega's surprise launch of the Saturn echoes down empty aisles, an event not announced on their calendars. Boxes stacked in loading docks, some stores eagerly opening crates, only to find nothing inside. Other retailers stand by, excluded from the wave, feeling betrayed as customers queue outside, murmuring about a console they cannot buy. Corporate phones ring endlessly. Regional managers try to soothe angry partners, promising compensation and clarity. Yet, trust built over years crumbles in hours. In break rooms, retailers vent their frustration, fearing lost sales and damaged reputations. Whispers spread through the developer community. Programmers gather over lukewarm coffee, poring over Saturn's arcane architecture. They vent about the system's complexity, work piling up, creativity stifled by rushed timelines. The pressure mounts, and the excitement from the launch quickly curdles into anxiety. Sega's marketing team scans social feeds and sales numbers, realizing momentum is slipping. They scramble for new strategies, but the backlash is everywhere. Meanwhile, at Sony's headquarters, executives track every headline and rumor. Sony takes the stage. The lights dimmed, and the murmurs softened as Sony's representatives stepped onto the stage for the very first time at the world's largest gaming expo. Until this moment, the world had never seen Sony as a player in the console wars. Sega and Nintendo had always been center stage, their legacies carved into the fabric of gaming history. But today, the crowd buzzed with a unique blend of skepticism and curiosity. No legacy, no expectations, a newcomer's gamble. A sleek logo materialized on the giant screen overhead, and a polished black box rotated in the spotlight. PlayStation, a single word, but with it came a promise. New hardware, new ideas, a new era. The presenter, calm and composed, walked to the podium. Flashbulbs flickered. In the audience, third-party developers leaned forward. Unlike Sega's Saturn and Nintendo's upcoming Ultra 64, Sony's PlayStation wasn't built from old rivalries or past hardware baggage. Instead, it was created for developers. The crowd began to notice the finer details. Easy-to-use architecture, affordable components, advanced 3D graphics capabilities. Whispers rippled through the room. The possibilities began to sink in. But one question hung in the air, heavier than all the rest: the price. How much would this leap into the unknown cost? Sony's presenter's hands rested on the lectern. Someone in the front row nervously tapped a pen. Another audience member adjusted his tie. The air thickened. You could hear a pin drop. The hush was electrifying, amplified by the anticipation of countless gamers and investors glued to live feeds around the globe. Then, breaking the silence, the presenter leaned into the mic and uttered just one number: the price of the PlayStation. A number far lower than what the competitor had announced just minutes prior. A restless murmur filled the auditorium. Reporters hunched forward, video cameras ready, as the fierce battle between gaming giants grew more personal by the hour. All eyes pinned themselves to the stage, but for a moment, the air felt like it belonged to Sega alone. The pride of their Saturn launch, the anticipation of groundbreaking reveals, the emotional head start in this new generation of consoles. Stage left, a black-suited Sony executive walked in with quiet confidence. His expression betrayed nothing. His path was measured. Sega's leaders exchanged stiff glances, mouths pressed to hide their nerves as Sony's reputation for disruption held heavily in the room. No fanfare, no sprawling presentation. The Sony executive took his place at the microphone. The press straightened in their seats, pens hovering over notepads. He leaned in to 99. A single syllable stretched into a thunderclap. Silence fractured into gasps, rising cheers and laughter. The room shook as the crowd processed it. Sony's PlayStation, at $299, undercut Sega's Saturn by a full $100. Years of market positioning, consumer loyalty, and technical marvels, all undone in a breath. For a heartbeat, Sega's confidence shrank behind glossy banners and hopeful slogans. Their team watched, speechless, while the press surged with energy that no marketing budget could buy. The noise didn't stop. The message rippled out. Street chatter, news tickers, gaming magazines. Sony wasn't just competing, they were redefining the rules. Outside, young gamers and curious onlookers debated the new landscape. PlayStation felt suddenly within reach. In bedrooms, on playgrounds, in electronic stores, the phrase spread. Did you hear? Sony's is $299. Sega scrambled for counter-moves, strategizing on damage control. But the $299 moment wasn't just a pricing strategy, it was a cultural shift. It touched managers, fans, and shareholders alike with the same shockwave. For Sony, it was the biggest mic drop ever. For Sega, it was only the beginning of their troubles. As dawn broke over Tokyo, the mood in the city's game development circles was buzzing with anticipation. Just the night before, a major tech conference unveiled a new console, one that promised studios cheaper hardware, easier-to-use tools, and unexpectedly spacious storage. The air was thick with whispers. Could this really be the industry's turning point? Down a narrow street, in a cramped but lively third-party studio, lead programmer Mitsuo tapped rapidly at his keyboard. He had spent years laboring to make his games compatible with multiple platforms, always wrestling with hardware limitations and time-consuming development kits. Now, his team huddled around a fresh PlayStation dev kit, eyes wide and eager. "This makes everything different," Mitsuo said, thumbing through the new documentation. The rest of his studio agreed. Fine textures rendered faster. Worlds could be bigger. Long cinematic sequences were actually possible. Word spread quickly. In coffee shops and smoke-filled arcades, developers debated the implications. "Why bother with the old systems?" a designer asked his peers. "Everyone's getting on board with PlayStation." Sega's corridors, in contrast, seemed to darken with each passing day. Once, developers from all over the world courted Sega, pitching ideas and lining up for support. Now, urgent meetings filled the silence. Emails flooded in, all bearing the same bad news. Third-party studios were flocking to Sony's platform. Sega's executives watched the exodus with growing dread. Each major studio that switched sides meant fewer exclusive titles, fewer innovative games, and more consumers shifting their loyalty to PlayStation. The vibrant ecosystem that fueled their consoles started to thin. Soon, gamers felt the impact. Magazine covers and television commercials showcased dazzling new experiences only available on the competitor system. Game shops sold out of PlayStations, while dust gathered on Sega's shelves. The early months of 1996 brought a chill to Sega HQ. Until recently, the Saturn had been seen as a contender, but now, something had shifted. In electronic stores, the bright, futuristic Saturn kiosk shrank, replaced by sprawling displays of PlayStation boxes and banners. Inside the stores, parents hustled their children past Sega's section, smaller than before, almost hidden behind a pillar. Kids pointed eagerly to PlayStation games, crisp graphics, smooth gameplay, exclusive titles. Retailers, eyeing their bottom line, began to cut Saturn shelf space. One manager shrugged, "It just doesn't move anymore." Back at Sega, financial reports piled up. The sales graphs for Saturn plateaued. Meanwhile, PlayStation's numbers soared week on week. Executives exchanged uneasy glances over urgent conference calls. The Saturn's momentum had evaporated. Consumers had chosen their champion, and it wasn't Sega. On the street, gamers talked about PlayStation as the machine to have. The Saturn seemed to fade into the background. Software partners started pulling deals, redirecting their efforts towards Sony's juggernaut. Sega's financial team worked late nights, crunching budgets, cutting promotional plans. Rumors swirled about layoffs. There was no easy fix. The hole was too deep, the turnaround too expensive and uncertain. Facing the brutal reality, Sega's leadership realized momentum was everything, and theirs had vanished. Sega was bleeding money. The collapse was swift, the pain real. Recovery no longer seemed like a question of when, but how or if it would ever arrive. In a bustling boardroom filled with anxious Sega executives, hope flickered once more. After the bruising defeat of the Saturn, Sega was not ready to give up. "We'll make the Dreamcast our masterpiece," a determined engineer whispered, eyes sparkling with the possibility of redemption. In 1998, the Sega Dreamcast was unveiled. Its features were unlike anything the gaming world had seen. Online play, a built-in modem, stunning graphics, and a quirky controller. This was more than a console, it was a vision. The marketing team poured into strategies, aiming to capture hearts and wallets before skepticism spread. Players marveled at titles like Sonic Adventure and Shenmue. For a brief moment, the Dreamcast seemed to revive Sega's reputation. Enthusiasts lined up, forums buzzed, and arcades echoed with excitement. But beneath this optimism, shadows lingered. Retailers remembered Sega's missteps, and consumers worried that the gamble would turn sour once again. Then, Sony entered the stage, cool, calculated, and patient. The PlayStation 2 promised DVD playback, backward compatibility, and a vast library. Sega watched as interest began to shift. The PS2's launch swept through headlines and homes, casting doubt on the Dreamcast's future. Sales stalled, stock dwindled, and developers slowly pulled support. By 2001, an uneasy silence settled in Sega's headquarters. In the huge meeting room, engineers, marketers, and executives watched as the final reports for the Sega Dreamcast rolled in. Sales figures dropping, stores requesting fewer units, and competitors climbing ever higher. The buzz of innovation was replaced by anxious murmurs. The conversation had changed from what's next to what's left. A company that once dared to face Nintendo head-on, unleashing Sonic the Hedgehog and the Genesis console with fearless swagger, now stood at a crossroads. Once, their headquarters had throbbed with the energy of a titan fighting through the console wars. Now, that energy was dissipating. The turning point stretched back 6 years, to the spring of 1995. That year was pivotal. Sony entered the scene with its PlayStation, and Sega Saturn, rushed to market, struggled to match expectations. The momentum that propelled Sega's rise began to shift. Gamers buzzed about Sony's sleek system. Industry insiders watched as Sega scrambled. The Saturn's launch was marred by confusion, limited software, and lost trust. The long-term consequences were slow-burning but certain. Fast forward to 2001, the decision was made. Sega would stop making consoles, shuttering production lines that once poured out shiny new machines. The news rippled through the press, shocking loyal fans and industry veterans alike. Their legacy of hardware, the Master System, the Genesis, the Saturn, the Dreamcast, would become museum pieces, reminders of a daring past. Staff who grew up with the joy of developing cutting-edge consoles now adjusted to a new mission: software, not hardware. Some bristled at the change, feeling nostalgic for the days when Sonic was not just a game, but a symbol of the company's power. Others faced reality, knowing Sega could not survive another console war. To survive, they would evolve. The console battlefield left Sega wounded, but not defeated. They looked to the future, recasting Sonic and their other icons not as exclusive champions, but as ambassadors in new lands, appearing on Nintendo, Sony, Microsoft platforms. The exit from hardware was not a surrender, but a strategic retreat, an acknowledgement of the momentum lost in 1995, but a hope for renewal in a new era. As the sun set on Sega's hardware dreams, a new dawn rose for its software ambitions. The story was no longer about consoles conquered or wars waged. It was about survival, transformation, and the persistence of play. The conference room hummed with expectation. Blinding lights poured over a glossy stage where two new consoles stood veiled beneath silk cloths. The air was swollen with anticipation and, if you looked closely enough, with wariness. In the hidden corners of the expo, executives whispered, retailers checked last-minute price lists, and fans hunched over their phones, hungry for a headline. First up, a confident presenter strolled onto the stage, his hands sweeping towards their next-generation marvel. Features rattled off: advanced processors, cinematic ray tracing, a streaming future. The audience nodded, some stunned, some skeptical. The price appeared, $499. Applause, not a cheer, but the relieved, slow clap of the compatible. Then came the second presentation, barely an hour later. Their console, equally powerful, equally hyped. The presenter paused, savoring the moment. With a flourish, the reveal, $399. A visible shudder passed through the press rows. Some gasped, some scoffed, but the message was clear. 3 digits, $100 gap, separated the two. Minutes later, headlines spread like brush fire. Next Gen upset. Company B undercuts rival by $100. Retail buyers whisper instructions over encrypted phones. Pre-orders were shifted. Shelves in key outlets were set as bets. Developers pondered which console to prioritize, quietly consulting their bottom lines. But it wasn't just about price. Beneath the numbers surged deeper issues. Which developer had courted more trust with indie studios? Which giant would honor relationships, offer better margins, keep retailers stocked?